And from my perspective, I think you're beginning to see a nascent conversation, really early stages happening between kind of the Web3 community and the AI community. And what happens when you start to kind of converge these foundational technologies, how this convergence of technologies is going to be a little bit of a game changer.
Techsauce Global, sparking innovative thoughts. Hello, this is Techsauce Global Podcast, a podcast series that seeks to connect with leading professionals from various fields to gain insight, learn from them, and inspire a community with the latest innovative ideas. I'm Pupe Chawarat-Yongjiranon, a global content editor at Techsauce and your host. Today, we take a look at the latest movements within the Fintech sector, which has been impacted by environmental, social, and governance factors, artificial intelligence, and digital currencies. To gain more insight on what is actually happening, we talk with Pat Patel, the Executive Director of Elevandi, a non-profit entity set up by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS, to connect people and businesses, ideas, and insights in the fintech sector in Singapore and around the world. Pat is building a collaborative fintech ecosystems relations across South Asia, Africa, and Europe at national and industry level. Hello, Pat.
Hi. It's great to be on your show. I'm a big fan of Techsauce.
We're a big fan of you as well and your work. Just to set up the conversation, can you share more about Elevandi and your purpose?
Absolutely. So Elevandi is a very, very unique project that we set up in 2021 when I was part of the Monetary Authority of Singapore. The actual name Elevandi is taken from Latin, which means to come together, to rise up. And that is a heart and soul of what we're seeking to do, which is to build a kind of foster a dialogue between the public sector on one side and the private sector on the other side. And so what we do with this is we convene the right people to shape the right kind of policies and regulations that are coming down the line, and also try and support the industry to build the right products and services within financial services. And so, it's very closely aligned to technology. It's closely aligned to the different verticals in fintech. And we try to kind of uncover and advance those growth and adoption opportunities. And so one of the, thesis that we have that kind of underpins a lot of what we're doing is, if you think about, say, the Web2 industry sector that kind of grew in 2007 and 2008, where you had mobile on one side, cloud and social coming together to form companies such as Airbnb, Uber, a lot of the social media companies that we see today, they kind of grew in scale over this, over a 10-year period, but they didn't really have a dialogue with the regulator or the policymaker. And now, as you're beginning to see, we're seeing a bit of a clampdown on these so-called big tech companies. We're seeing it in Europe, we're seeing it in the US, and certainly we've seen it in China as well. And so we believe that as we move as a society and as an industry towards a Web3 world, you really need to have that dialogue between the policymaker and the regulator with the industry. So the industry can kind of build the right products and services that have taken into account some of these policies and regulations coming down the line. But also the regulator and policymaker can really understand where these technologists and innovators are driving the financial services sector forward. And so, it's a great project to be involved in. We're a non-profit organization. Our KPIs are simply to advance fintech and tech in financial services. And so, it's an amazing time to be in this industry because there's so much change and disruption. Clearly, there are some tough times out there, but that's where some of the best products and services are delivered. And we see it as our mission to uncover some of those products and services and connect them to the right people with regulators, policymakers, but also investors and kind of corporate leaders, so we can advance into multiple jurisdictions. So it's great times at the moment at Elevandi.
I believe so. And it is true, right? Everything is evolving, everything is changing. But at the same time, you really have to have that insurance, that's kind of like security blanket that we are able to work together, coincide with, both the public and private sectors. When we take a look at the changes that we've seen in the fintech world, definitely it has been a whirlwind of some sorts. What are some of the key changes you're seeing right now?
Sure. So I think there's a few key trends. I could probably talk all day with you about this, but I'll try to pick out a few, I think. So the first for me is, if you think about fintech, it feels like the honeymoon period is over. If you think in between the years of 2016 to about 2022, there was lots of capital in the industry. And so that fueled a lot of growth of fintech. But now we're seeing a change. We're seeing a change in business models as fintech is evolving in these tough market conditions. But we're also seeing challenges in the VC world that was traditionally used to fuel the growth and adoption. And, I'm sure you remember in 2021, there were some amazing funding rounds, largely from the Western countries, where, 100 million, 200 million kind of funding rounds, which is absolutely insane. In some cases, it was close to $1 billion. And so we're seeing a change at the moment in the sense that, exit strategies have changed. That golden kind of handshake of an IPO is not necessarily paved with gold anymore. And we're seeing changes in how founders are looking at their businesses. And I think one of the, interesting nuances here is that in the past, growth was kind of preferred over profitability. But that's flipped now, and profitability is the key phrase in fintech at the moment, because it's all well and good growing, but if your business and your bottom line isn't showing the right margins, then you're unlikely to get your next funding round. And so this dynamic is having a very profound impact on the fintech industry. And in my personal opinion, I think it's for the best. I really do. You need to build resilient business models and businesses that have, viable products and services for today, not for tomorrow or the day after. And that's kind of one thing. The second piece we're seeing is all around risk management. It's not massively sexy as a topic, but it's a very important one. And if you think about everything that's happened in, say, the last kind of 6 to 12 months, there's been a massive issue around businesses and how they manage their risk. We've seen it in the banking industry. We saw it in the US with SVB. We've also seen it with Credit Suisse. And so what we firmly believe is that a lot of businesses in the world today have risk frameworks that were fit for purpose yesterday and probably the day before yesterday, but they're not fit for purpose today or tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. And so, we're seeing this change happening. And one of the dialogues that we're having, in Europe and Africa, but also importantly in Singapore at the end of the year at the festival, will be around, what does this new risk framework look like? How can we future-proof our businesses to remain resilient? And so that's kind of a really, important topic for us. And then the last piece is, and, it's thankfully, the raison d'etre of what Elevandi is that increase in a dialogue between the public and the private sector. And this is, importantly needed because it will drive the growth and adoption and the security and safety of technology, so digital assets and artificial intelligence, but also fintech businesses that are looking to create disruption for the better in financial services. So they are kind of the three areas. If I was to recap, it's around the changing business models and VC landscape. It's risk management. And then the third area is around that public and private sector dialogue.
It's amazing how, what you're saying has been echoed with a lot of the different speakers I've talked about, what the world we are today is definitely not the world that we were in before COVID-19. And, longevity is the key. So with these factors in mind, how do you see it impacting emerging markets, specifically, in Southeast Asia?
No, it's a very good question. And so I see a few changes. I think, the concept of digital public goods is a really important one. So the best way to explain this is if you look at, say, what's in India at the moment, you have something called the India Stack. And that stack comprises of 4 key pillars. The first pillar is a digital identity system. The second pillar is all around payments, but an interoperability of payments and payment systems. The third one is around an exchange, so a data exchange of financial and non-financial information in a trusted and secure way. And then the last area, which is mostly the trickiest part to get right, is that consent architecture. So how do consumers and businesses consent for their data to be used in certain ways? And so when an economy has those 4 pillars, they have the fundamentals of a digital economy. And to date, we only have India has this technology, Singapore has variants of it, and then you're seeing some of this across Northern Europe. But it's a very important part for financial inclusion, because if you have this stack in place, it reduces the cost to serve and provides reach to the masses. And coming back to the India example, there are close to, I think it's just over 1 billion people are on this database that is biometrically enabled and just allows people to be able to move money, open bank accounts, but it just makes the whole kind of financial system much, much easier. And it's not just financial services, it's across the range of industries where you have an identity that you can, move different goods and services, but also different products into different parts of the economy. It increases the velocity of money as well. And so we see that as a big trend that is set to shape and impact not just Southeast Asia, Africa, and LATAM as well. And so that's an important piece, digital public goods. The second is the growth of kind of micro-based products for inclusion. So whether it's micro pensions or micro insurance products, but these are kind of springing up across Southeast Asia. I think Southeast Asia is probably one of the front runners, but you're beginning to see it in Africa and LATAM as well. And these are affordable kind of customized services for the masses. So it's not just for those that the haves of this world, but those that are kind of the have-nots in this world, and the rural areas where you can afford micro-based products, pensions, and micro insurance products, which are very, very important for communities to develop and grow and pass on to their next generation. The last piece here is around a continued story around super apps. And so we've seen super apps kind of become very pervasive across Southeast Asia, largely emanating from China, but we're beginning to see that story kind of unfold and advance again, as especially if you see what Gojek's currently doing in terms of, when I say Gojek is GoTo now with the merger of Gojek and Tokopedia, but we're seeing that with Grab. We're seeing kind of similar types of companies spring up across Africa and LATAM as well. And I certainly see that these super app the next wave of super apps are going to continue to drive convenience, access, and also an important one is embedded finance to make that experience a lot more seamless. And so those are kind of the three areas: the digital public goods, micro products, and then the next story of the super app dialogue.
So cutting that kind of gap between, in terms of the credit gap in society, right? At the same time, we also have, ESG factors, sustainability and environmental, social, and governance factors all impacting the finance industry as well. How has that been so far?
Well, it's been a stop-start journey for the last few years. And, I think when markets are tough and conditions are very challenging, it seems to slow down the momentum of ESG in corporates and financial services. And, from our perspective, these environmental considerations are going to be costly to start with, but they pay off in the longer term in terms of the way consumers and businesses engage with your products and services. And, this is a desperation basically to move towards net zero and ideally net negative, because this is an imperative. It's not an option anymore. If we want our future generations to be able to have the luxuries and live and breathe in the way that we currently do, we need to be making these changes quite swiftly. And so, as we kind of move along on this dialogue, we have an important conversation that's happening in Zurich towards the end of this month, which is called the Point Zero Forum. And that's where we're bringing together policymakers, regulators, and the right industry leaders to have this important dialogue. And, one of the key bits here is around how can we leverage, technologies such as digital assets and artificial intelligence to solve some of the challenges we're seeing on the ESG side. A great example of this is, moving towards, say, kind of our carbon footprints, but moving towards kind of proxy data to real world data, so we can really effectively track and measure, and then obviously understand how we need to improve going on year by year. So from my perspective, it's massively important. I just think the industry needs to do more. I think as a society, we can do better.
I'm going to bring a buzzword here that will have a part in what you just said before, and that is artificial intelligence or AI. You've seen it everywhere. How do you see the integration of AI influencing the financial sector in the next decade?
Well, it seems to be the buzzword. You're right. That hype cycle is in overdrive right now. If you think back to kind of 2017, 2018, there was a big momentum shift towards artificial intelligence that then subsided a little bit, and you started to see digital assets and kind of the word crypto kind of spring up and take a lot of the limelight. And as we've seen, last year with the crypto winter, AI seems to have kind of, risen and moved up that food chain. And so, we're seeing it as an important foundational technology that's going to impact the front office, but also the back office of financial institutions. And so we're seeing a lot of investments coming into AI. I was in Silicon Valley and LA a few months ago, and, every conversation I was having was around artificial intelligence. It felt like every pitch deck that was being presented to me had the word AI in there. And it feels that if you put that word in a pitch deck, you've increased the value of your business, which is just really insane today. But if you take that hype away, there are some real tangible products and services that are being built. And from my perspective, I think you're beginning to see a nascent conversation, really early stages happening between kind of the Web3 community and the AI community. And what happens when you start to kind of converge these foundational technologies? It can help with privacy. It can help with security as well by leveraging some of these AI or generative AI capabilities. And so, we're in conversations with a few companies that are doing some really interesting projects that are in stealth mode. And we're hoping to bring them across to the festival so they can share, how this convergence of technologies is going to be a little bit of a game changer. And we'll see the momentum of both of these two technologies kind of move over the coming years to really create some interesting kind of propositions, but solve some real world challenges that we're seeing, certainly on sustainability side, but also increase efficiencies and the cost to serve in the front and the back office.
It's also interesting what you said. Cryptocurrency has kind of like go up and down with that, but we have the rise of digital currencies and central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. We can't deny it. So, what implications do you see for the future of finance on this side?
On CBDCs and digital currencies, so it's massive. From my personal perspective, CBDCs have taken a little bit of time to take off. There's been these experiments, there's been industry consultations. It feels like it's been going on for like 5 to 7 years. But I think we're beginning this year to see some tangible kind of, not pilots, but actually real world kind of implementations. And, we've seen some of it across LATAM. We're seeing kind of these different jurisdictions across Europe and Asia kind of collaborating. And we'll start to see a bit more movement happening this year. But on the note of kind of stable coins, I believe, there are some great use cases coming out. And one of my favorite ones where we're seeing large corporates experimenting, but also leveraging this technology, is around how global companies that have multiple subsidiaries and very complex supply chains across multiple jurisdictions can leverage stable coins that help reduce costs and increase those efficiencies. And I think that will be one of the killer use cases, certainly in stable coins, that we'll see over the coming year. And I believe, there is a number of car manufacturers, there are a number of kind of industry sectors that are using, stable coins in terms of within the enterprise itself. Yes, there are risks, and we're likely to see more regulations coming down the line. But I think this is obvious. This is natural to happen. There needs to be that, security and safety in mind. And I think it's good to the industry to a degree, as long as it doesn't hinder the growth and innovation and technology adoption and growth.
It's really hard to kind of like put everything together in the time that we have, but you have been able to really give us an insight into all the big issues that I'm sure a lot of our listeners are wanting to know about. But let's talk about your work. I hear that you are starting a new initiative in Africa, and also this advanced financial inclusion. How are you moving right now?
Yeah, so it's super fast paced. It feels like there is just so much going on, so much activity. And, as I mentioned earlier, it's a great time to be in financial services. And we see ourselves at the forefront of where the industry currently is. and we're looking to kind of push those boundaries forward. So that's a fantastic place to be. One of our latest projects is in Africa, and by the time this show actually goes out, we would have kind of been there. And so this is it's a dialogue around implementation in Africa and the global South. It's a dialogue around inclusion. And when I talk about implementation and inclusion, you've got two elements to this. You've got the foundations. So I alluded to that earlier with digital public goods. So if you have, these 4 pillars in place, it can really make a difference in terms of the products and services that can be built on top of these, this national infrastructure, which allows seamless transfer of money, seamless transfer of data, but also seamless transfer of your identities to the companies that you choose that you want to share with. And so that will be a fundamental piece in the advancements of financial inclusion. Another dialogue that we're going to be having at the Africa inclusive Fintech forum in Rwanda is around those verticals in financial services. So micro-based products, as I'd mentioned, but also how do we start to look at kind of capital markets? How do we start to improve these kind of capital market infrastructure to attract more investment to come in and fund the next wave of businesses? And that's an important dialogue that we'll be having, as well as supporting businesses to scale across multiple markets and ideally across different regions, because there are lots of opportunities for companies in Southeast Asia to export some of their products and services and partnerships across Africa, but also in LATAM, because there's been so many great advancements in Southeast Asia. I think the other kind of points to note here is, and the importance of what we're doing in Africa, is that we're bringing a number of the presidents and prime ministers coming in for that dialogue with the industry. We'll also be bringing policymakers and regulators, so we can really start to think through these infrastructure questions, but also that inclusion policy. So how do we create inclusive and sustainable fintech businesses? And back to, what I'd said at the beginning, you need that public-private sector dialogue. And that's exactly what Elevandi is about. And that's what we're hoping to achieve in terms of advancing the financial inclusion debate by bringing together not just the communities in Africa, but the communities in Southeast Asia and the communities in Latin America, because there are so many commonalities in terms of the demographics and the challenges that we all face in this part of the global South.
A big feat. Are you getting enough sleep, Pat?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
I have an amazing team. I'm very fortunate to have an amazing team. Yeah.
But it is very important, and I'm so excited to hear about your work because of that point. The importance of the private-public relationship that we really need, and that connectivity that we kind of struggled with during the pandemic. A lot of points that you addressed today, I think a lot of people are anticipating to see what's next in terms of ESG factors, whether it is AI or digital currencies. And so, of course, as always, this year you are going to have the Singapore Fintech Festival, which has been touted as one of the biggest festivals of all time in fintech. What should we expect from SFF 2023?
So, we are so excited about what's going to come up, in November. So it's the 13th to the 17th of November. And it just seems to be getting bigger and bigger year on year. It feels like we've managed to kind of create the right dialogue. And we refer to this as a policy, technology, and financial services dialogue. So bringing these 3 kind of elements together creates what is the fundamentals of the Singapore Fintech Festival. And, we're expecting 65,000 crazy fintech folks and policymakers and regulators all coming into Singapore during that week. Our theme this year is around the applications of AI. So we'll be exploring practical use cases. We'll be exploring about the investment curve that's coming into artificial intelligence. But we'll also be covering some of the other building blocks that we're seeing in terms of the important topics around Web3, financial inclusion, digital public goods that I mentioned. And then also, that move towards kind of net zero. How do we achieve that in terms of, driving forward, new products and services, but also making sure we're doing this in a sustainable way. And so all of the dialogues that we have in Europe, that's happening at the Point Zero Forum at the end of June, and what we're having in Africa, all of these key dialogues and people will be coming across to the festival to continue that set of conversations, but also continue the collaboration and the partnerships. Other things that are new for this year is that, we realized based on customer feedback that, the expo where we host the festival is just so large that it's very difficult to navigate your way around. It's like your first day at school where, everything just seems, massive. And so what we've decided to do this year is create different zones. So we'll have a tech zone, we'll have a regulators zone, we'll have a founders zone, we'll have a talent development zone, and we'll even have an ESG zone as well. And so this will help people to kind of navigate and really get to the content and companies that they want to have those dialogues with, because it's all about that engagement. It's all about those dialogues. And so, fortunately for this year, we're also partnering with a number of really interesting companies. One is TIE, which is an entrepreneurial kind of association out of Silicon Valley. They have like 57 chapters around the world. It's entrepreneurs, it's investors. And so they'll be locating at the Singapore Fintech Festival. So that will bring a large segment of US investors, a large segment of US entrepreneurs into the festival. So that starts to have, a good dialogue there. And then we're also partnering with a company called Salt, which is run by Skybridge, and that's an asset managers event. And so they'll be co-locating during the week of the festival, and they'll be bringing, their communities to the table as well. And all this does is just expand the different communities from different jurisdictions that will be at the festival. Because as you know, we have a large part of Asia coming. We have Africa coming from our recent projects that we're doing. We have Europe coming. And now we'll start to see more of the US community and the Latin America community coming over for the festival. And there's three kind of particular projects that I want to mention just very briefly. I hope we've still got time. One is great. So one is the Insights Forum that we're running. And this is a series of roundtables on point topic areas. So they're there intended to advance, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's stablecoins, whether it's CBDCs, whether it's even cross-border payments. And we partner with these roundtables with some of the, impressive organizations in the public sector and quasi-public sector. So organizations like the IMF, the MES will be there, the Swiss government, the World Bank, the IFC, the Milken Institute. And so we partner with them to run these roundtables with the sole intention of creating a series of white papers on the dialogue that happens, but also looking to kind of influence and shape some of the policy choices that are coming down the line, whether it's stablecoins related digital assets or AI based. And so these are kind of really curated dialogues that help advance the industry. And that product is the Elevandi Insights Forum, and that will be running in the early part of the week. Another product that we're launching as well this year is the Capital Meets Policy Dialogue. And so after, a number of conversations with VCs of all shapes and sizes, so whether it's a VC, whether it's an LP, family office, or sovereign wealth fund, when we spoke to them, they said to us, one of the most important things that they need right now is to understand policy roadmaps in different jurisdictions around the world. Because if they understand these policy roadmaps, that will inform their investment thesis. That in turn informs the capital deployment choices that they will be making in different markets around the world. And so that is a really important conversation to bring investors together with policymakers and regulators. And the last one we have here, which I hope is very relevant to a large number of the founder community that Techsauce reaches out to, is something called the Founders Peak. And so this is a very similar format to TED, where we give founders 10 minutes to talk about the pivotal moment that has influenced where they currently are today. So that moment that has got them to where their business is today. So they're not allowed to talk about their products or services. They're not allowed to talk about their companies. It's about the person that's leading the business. And this is such a great format because it really resonates with investors. Because if you think, a lot of investors are buying into the company, yes, but they importantly are buying into the founder that's leading the business. And so for a founder to get on stage and deliver a 10-minute TED-type talk is just a cathartic moment for the founder, but also a very important moment for investors that are watching that talk to really get to understand underneath the skin of that individual, whether it's a man or a woman, that's delivered and driven that business to where it is today. And so that's kind of, a few interesting products that we'll have at the Singapore Fintech Festival. And one of the most important ones is our partnership with Techsauce. So we're currently in conversations around how we can kind of work together on your global summit, which is happening in August, and how in turn Techsauce can kind of provide a partnership on site at the Singapore Fintech Festival. And so we're currently exploring that. And all I can say is stay tuned for more, because, we have high hopes that we'll be able to deliver something meaningful at your event and vice versa at the Singapore Fintech Festival in partnership with Techsauce.
Wow, I am excited. Thank you, Pat. You did it well. Thank you so much for being with us here today and sharing your insights on the latest movements in fintech and Elevandi's work as well. We look forward to SFF 2023, and of course, you as well being a part of the Techsauce Global Summit. This has been the latest episode of Techsauce Global Podcast. If you want to listen to more inspiring conversations such as this, you can find out the podcast series at techsauce.co/en. Thanks for joining us. See you in our next episode of Techsauce Global Podcast. สวัสดีค่ะ
Techsauce, sparking innovative thoughts.